If you had to give advice to somebody that was going to franchise their concept, regardless if it's a brick and mortar or a service-based business, what would you tell them on how much money they should have before they franchise their brand?
It's that's a really hard question to answer because every brand has slightly different needs, but it's millions. It's not hundreds of thousands, it's millions. So, and I think the game's continued to change as we've seen private equity and franchise sales organizations and all these other players come in to this community. That number goes up because the barrier for entry keeps going up a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. So I would say probably a minimum of 5 million would be my guess to really get a brand going in the right way.
Hmm.
And that seems like an outrageous amount of money, but I think that's kind of the minimum.
Okay. I think that's, it again, it depends on the brand. I think it's a very high number. But I think that if you really want to be, extremely conservative, making sure you have plenty of cash, sure. But again, it depends. I don't think a service-based brand needs to have anywhere near that capital. But at the same time, it definitely is not the $250,000 that you hear consultants talk about.
No way. And it depends on the infrastructure that you're really trying to put in place for your franchisees. And I've just seen, even in the 4 or 5 years that we've been doing this, the landscape is continuing to change in a competitive way. And, I talk about like FSOs and stuff like that.
Sure.
The amount of marketing dollars spent just to attract the right potential franchisees has gone way up. It's gotten much more competitive in that space.
Right.
So I think there's unique challenges continuing to come into the franchising space.
Would you both agree that one of the ways we can combat it by going into franchising is making sure that we have at least a couple of company-owned locations that are cash flowing so that we don't have to sell franchises just to keep the lights on? And that allows us to at least be able to breathe and not, need an FSO that's going to come in and say, hey, I'm going to sell 40 franchises in the first year, whether you're ready or not.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And not only for that reason, but also for the reason that you need to prove out the model and you need a place to try things out and figure out what works and what doesn't work and really kind of have that test kitchen to make sure that as you're scaling and becoming a franchise system, that you know what works and you've been able to do the testing that's appropriate.
Yeah, that's a good point. Before we get too far down on the show, I think we need to let the audience know what kind of numbers we're talking about for Scenthound. You guys are an emerging franchisor only because based on the amount of time you've been in franchising, since you started franchising in good old 2020. But I understand you have 108 franchises open with another 172 in development. That is absolutely enormous. That would be 280 franchises. Jessica, how in the world did you guys do it?
Yeah, we're very, very proud of that actually. And, just in July, a couple months ago, we opened our 100th location, which was a really big milestone for us. It's a big milestone in the franchising industry, as you well know. I think that it was really a concept that we brought to the market at the right time. We figured it out. Like Tim said, we did a lot of pre-work, right? So we started in the pet industry, in the grooming industry specifically in 2005. And so we spent a decade before we even arrived at this concept, figuring out the industry, figuring out the model. We really put in the pre-work before we got to the point where we decided to start franchising. And then we figured out the model. And as Tim mentioned, then we invested in a team and built the infrastructure before starting to franchise. So we put in a lot of work ahead of time, which I think how we were able to have the foundation to grow at that scale.
It's very consistent with some of the founders that I talk to that have an enormous amount of success is that they did the stuff that was the ugly stuff first. They did all of the systems and processes and hiring ahead of time. It wasn't the fun, I'm going to go ahead and sell franchises first. It's like, these are the things that you need to do. You have to plant the seeds. You just can't start harvesting.
What's even interesting about that is we thought we did a lot of that. And as we got to that 50 mark, 25 mark, 50 mark, we took things, I specifically personally took things for granted that because it was natural for me, I understood it inside and out, that the franchisees didn't.
Like what? So, give me an example.
Yeah, so like the employee journey.
Okay.
Really understanding the employee journey, like here's how it works, guys. And it just wasn't getting done in the way that I did it. Like we weren't leading high performing teams, we weren't promoting from within, we didn't drive the right culture. And I was like, I told you guys, this is what we need to do. And then I realized, well, actually, that's an innate skill I have. And I need to go back and reverse engineer something that's innate to me. And so that was a big aha moment for me, which is now we've created these maps step by step, how you source, how you interview, how you onboard, how you do daily huddles, how you actually drive culture, how do you instill the value system? Like all of these kinds of things had to be reverse engineered so that we could hand deliver it to the franchisees so they could execute on it in a more consistent way. And so you think you know it, and I think it's probably the case for most. You think you know it, and then you actually get on the battlefield and you realize, okay, we've got a lot of stuff to clean up and do better.
Sure.
So even with that early investment, even with that thoughtfulness in it, you get out there and you're like, oh crud, this actually isn't delivering exactly the way I need it to deliver. And so there's this iterative process and I believe that iterative process should go on forever and ever and ever. So continuing to refine, learn, refine, and that feedback loop and improvement loop should continue to go.
Sure. And it never ends.
Never ends.
Constant.
It doesn't. And, I think specifically in franchising, and when you asked earlier what was daunting about franchising, I think one of those things is the brand and brand consistency between all the franchise locations, right? Because we've got a lot of different business owners out there who are independent thinkers and entrepreneurs who are operating Scenthound locations. And so I think it's really, really critically important that the brand plays a big role in that, and that brand consistency is ever more important in a franchise system.
Yeah. Jessica, sometimes I feel like in franchising early on, we're like, herding cats of all of our franchisees. I could not imagine having 108 franchises open in such a short period of time. How have you guys been able to maintain a brand of consistency on top of the scale that you've been able to create in such a short time?
I think that having me involved in the business with my background, I had a long career in the creative industry, specifically working in branding and marketing. So I think that we were at a huge advantage, honestly, having my expertise in this area. It's a large investment that an organization needs to make in brand and in branding. And a lot of small or emerging businesses don't have that luxury. So I think that was a real advantage for us. And I think it helped us build the foundation for this really professional brand that had a strong brand presence, just kind of having my expertise on the team.
How I translate that, it's you knew who you were, right? You knew what your brand represented. You knew what the company was, who your audience was, what you were trying to accomplish, right?
Very much so. We actually went through, and I did this in my career for other companies, but we went through, and this happened many times in the Scenthound journey, but we really went through a process, which is kind of a deep dive to help articulate our vision, our mission, our values, kind of the pillars of our brand, and distill down kind of all the different things that come from a brand, and knowing who you are as a brand and having that at your core of your everyday activities and all the decisions that you make, which we very much do and kind of execute on, is completely the core of a brand. If you're not sure who you are, there's no way that you can express to a marketplace who you are. So you have to know who you are first and build a brand on that.
That's probably part of the reason why, Tim, going back to what you said earlier, why 400 franchisors quit each year. There's a number of reasons why. I think it would be a disservice unless we kind of close the loop on that. And I'd love to get your take. I certainly have a few opinions on why there are so many franchisors that stop franchising. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, a good business model, a successful business doesn't always translate to a scalable business. Mm-hmm. And so what are the key features of scalability, right? So the ability to repeat it at scale. And so it might be cult of personality. It might be a very unique skill set. So really understanding, do I have the components of scalability in place? That's kind of one of them. Mm-hmm. And then do I have the mechanisms to deliver that consistency? Do I have the mechanisms to maintain accountability around integrity of the brand and the integrity of the service, integrity of the product, whatever those kinds of things are? So it's probably not a terribly clear answer, but I think understanding what are the scalability features within your business and being able to then take those to market.
Yeah, because if you have a company that you franchise and you've only done it once, that's not really scalability. But in order to franchise, you have to be able to effectively have people do this, of course, multiple times, of course, you know.
In multiple markets, in multiple cultures. And there's a whole bunch of things there. And so do you have the right practices in place? Like culture is one of those. Culture is a consequence of practices. Right. So, when we talk about brand, our belief is people aren't really catching on to our mission, our vision, our values, that stuff, until they're making fun of you for bringing it up so much. Like that moment someone's making fun of me, I'm like, it's starting to catch. Great, that's success for me, right? So we do a daily huddle. We have practices in place where we every huddle in every location, and even in the corporate team by every team, we recite our North Star. We recite one of our pillars. We do something called core kudos, where we catch people doing things right and bring it back to one of our 5 core values, and then we document that. So there's these practices that really fit into scalability and repeatability that are super important.
Would you share what the core values are of the company?
Yeah, so our 5 core values, I've got a document right here with all of them listed out.
I bet you do.
and everyone's got a laminate, every center's got a poster on the wall in their huddle space. But dog first. So we advocate for the health and wellness of every single dog. Bring love, make a difference, one pack, and seek growth.
All right.
And let me just jump in, because I think scalability is critically important, and maybe an answer to your question that things haven't been thought through, systems and processes haven't been thought through in the right way for scalability, which is perhaps going back to your question of why franchises might fail. I think another really important factor is the franchise partners being values aligned with the organization. So we're a mission-driven organization. Tim just talked about our values. We have a North Star that's we enrich the connection between people and their dogs. Our mission is to provide routine hygiene and wellness care so dogs live longer, happier lives. And we actually really put a lot into that. And so we've gone out and we've recruited franchise partners who believe in our vision and our mission and our values and are very aligned with us. And I think that's the only way to have success in a franchise system, is if everyone is aligned and marching to the same drummer at the very core.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its hosts do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.